I forgot about that message because it's been over a month, it feels like, since we've done one of these. Welcome back. It's the Q&A that usually happens bi-weekly, but we had a little bit of a holiday break. Dr. Mike, Dr. James, somebody made a joke on, I was combing through the questions and they called you Dr. Mike the White, doing a little Gandalf the Gray, Gandalf the White reference and tying in your Instagram. So there was like levels of memes on that one, but I thought it was really good. So I'm going to call you for today, Dr. Mike the White. He has returned at the turn of the tide.
I don't remember fighting the Balrog or whatever for like an eternity on the way down that fucking volcano or whatever the hell.
Well, the Balrog
Did I get
was
any of that
Instagram.
Right?
That Balrog was Instagram, and you've come back to save everyone. But now you're like more pristine.
I'm Dr. Mike Israel. RP Dr. Mike is dead. He's dead.
So kudos to whoever made that joke. I forgot who you were, but I thought it was very funny.
All right, James, how are you feeling, sir?
I'm good. It's been like snow madness out here. I've just been in a perpetual state of plowing and shoveling and de-icing, and I'm good. But it's been a little crazy with the weather. We were in like a mega storm, like right when everybody left from the holiday, we got blasted. So doing okay though.
All right. That's the ups and downs of living in Montana.
Yeah. No, we got like several feet of snow. I'm looking at it right now, and it's like even just taking the dogs out is a pain in the ass because it's like going up to my knee and hip. Yeah, just to take them out. Yeah, I'm like, you damn dogs, just go.
All right, shall we?
Yes, we have many questions to get. What? Wait, what? This just changed. Wait a minute. I want to share. This isn't the screen that I want to share. Oh, I guess it's this screen. There we go. Zoom has updated, and I'm unfamiliar with the new way. Okay, good to go.
It's sharing your whole background.
Is it really?
It's sharing just your desktop background with nothing else on it.
What? This isn't the share that I want.
Ian Rushton made that photograph. Dude, let's see your porn stash.
No.
And I don't mean your mustache. I mean your collection.
Okay. Let's see. Share screen. I just want one screen. I don't want to share the whole. I have like I think it's reading the two monitors and it's using the other monitor. God, I feel like such a boomer on this episode. How about advanced sharing option? You piece of crap. All right, Mike, can I just make you the host and you do it?
Yeah, give me a sec.
Or you should be able to do it anyway, but.
Yeah.
Why is it doing it? It's never done that before.
Well, we'll see if it does it for me or not. Okay, Dr. Mike and James answer your questions. I hope when Milo does the timestamps, it's like, the first 3 minutes is boomers encounter technical difficulty.
Or actually, I think I know what to do here. Let me just try this instead.
All right. I'm ready to go.
Boomers and technical difficulty. How's that?
Yo, it worked.
I just moved the window over to the other screen. So now,
great.
Forgive me. Now I'm going to be looking at both directions for the rest of the episode today.
All right. First up is Flavio, who is?
Flavio
asks, can you talk about the health trade-offs, if any, of natural bodybuilding? I assume he was yelling when he asked that. I think we can all agree that there are at least some negative side effects of PED abuse. But what about aggressively pursuing genetic limits with only hard-ass training, but ton of protein and a few legal supplements like creatine and beta-alanine? So it's not really natural, is it? Just legal. Thanks, love the channel. Love you back, Flavio. So I would say that anytime you gain more weight than is the average weight in which your bone structure and height lives the longest, you are trading off long-term health. And those weights are relatively small. So I would say that, if you're like 5'9", okay, you should be weighing like somewhere between, 140 to 160 really. And then anything north of 160 after that is a really tiny, tiny difference up until you get to about 180 to 190. Once you cross to about 200 at 5'9", relatively lean, mind you, there's a little bit more stress for all your organ systems to carry that much weight around, a little stressful for your joints. The general amount of metabolism you're engaging in is higher because you weigh more, you eat more food, and you're more physically active to move your body around. And it seems that many biological systems, specifically ones of sexually reproducing organisms, have a bit of like your metabolism only has so much string to run through until it runs through it and it sort of unravels. So if you stay relatively low activity and you're very small and you eat very healthy, you can live a long time. This is essentially the same amount of metabolism. If you get bigger and you engage in lots and lots of physical activity, you run your metabolism faster, and you generally live less long because you have the same amount of metabolism to run until it's sort of unwound and essentially accumulated too many errors and all those other problems. So I would say anytime you're elevating your body weight significantly above what is average, and by the way, what was average with the highest life expectancy, you can look up online anytime you want. Just look up insurance tables, and there they are. And of course, there's a big range about that. I would say any minus or plus 20 pounds in almost every height is kind of irrelevant. You're really not changing the markers much. But if you're supposed to be 150 pounds and you naturally get to 190, which means you've mass gained up to 230 or something at your heaviest, then yeah, you'll be paying a little bit of a price. Not a very advanced way to pay. Also, of course, if you're getting bigger, naturally or not, you need to take care of your blood pressure, monitor it, medicate if necessary, because that stuff will kill you whether or not you're on PEDs. James, anything to add there?
Yeah, it was really good. I would just also add psychological health can be a thing for people using PEDs, right? So some of you might have experienced this. Some of you are maybe unaware. I don't want to use the term roid rage because I think that's it's a mischaracterization of what is happening. But for a lot of people, when they start using various PEDs, they start suffering from all sorts of stuff. It might be anxiety. It could be more aggression. It could be a cacophony of other emotions or negative emotions that start coming out that they don't really know how to deal with that well. So I think on a person-to-person basis, it's not really something you can know. Some people can take the kitchen sink of drugs and have very little psychological side effects. Some other people can take very little and have profound psychological consequences. So in addition to the health trade-offs that you're making, you have to kind of know whether or not you are a good psychological fit for that type of activity. Some people just aren't. So, and that will, of course, spill over into your physical health if you're not doing so well.
Side effects of PEDs were just physiological. All right. Next up is Henrik Anderson.
All right.
We have a complicated question. Does food and or stimulants just simply mask fatigue, or does it actually decrease how much fatigue you're accumulating? For example, taking a pre-workout before a workout makes me less systemically fatigued when I'm done. I'm still amped up to some extent. However, if I don't take anything, I end up more sluggish and tired afterwards. It's option 2, no pre-workout, more fatiguing. Fasted cardio is more fatiguing than fed cardio. Even though I'm doing the same amount of total work, I'm more systemically taxed after a fasted cardio session. Does that mean I'm actually accumulating more fatigue doing fasted cardio? I'm truly grateful for this webinar. Thank you so much for the knowledge, Mike and James. So the way you're phrasing this is actually very good. I'm glad you gave the examples because I would have answered a little differently had you not. Stimulants really only just mask fatigue. Now, approximately they reduce fatigue in the sense that they can buttress your performance and allow you to do things you wouldn't be able to do. But the underlying causes of fatigue, which is to say, cytokine disruptions, nervous system lack of healing, hormonal things, joint connective tissue stress, etc. They're still there as much as they ever were. And when you take stimulants, you can actually create even more of them. So while you're still amped up to some extent when you're done, that's just because there's still stimulants in your bloodstream. When they go that evening, you're going to get way more fatigue having plowed through a hard workout than if you didn't take anything and had a worse workout, because the worst workout at least doesn't fatigue you as much. Same idea in your example. Now, generally speaking, it has to be said from a conceptual perspective, in most cases, food actually does reduce fatigue. It does. But in your case, the fasted cardio versus fed cardio, the preponderance of it is that you're probably not going to accumulate much more fatigue after fasted than fed cardio, but you will feel more of the fatigue because of the nutrient amounts in your blood are just way lower. You do fasted cardio, your blood sugar is low, and you're going to feel like shit. If you do fed cardio, then your blood sugar stays up usually much higher because the food's still coming in, and as it's being used for cardio, it's still coming in from the GI tract. So after, a fasted cardio session, or after, a fed cardio session, a lot of times if you eat and then do cardio within the next 1 to 2 hours, there's still tons of nutrients leaking out of your GI tract, being absorbed from your GI tract into your circulation that hasn't even been, processed yet by your body. I mean, it's been digested and presented to you. So it's kind of like, oh, I feel less fatigue after fed cardio. Well, there's a reason for that. There's food still coming in. Like, you don't actually know how fatigued you are until there's not food coming in, and then you equalize the two conditions. So under the hood, fasted cardio probably doesn't fatigue you much more, if any more, than fed cardio, but you feel better just because of the food. Now, the stimulant side, the stimulant workout actually fatigues you more, but makes you temporarily feel better. And I'll parlay to James now so that he can say his piece. And at least I think James can extrapolate, not the dangers, but the be carefulness of using stims and just being like, oh, I can do anything.
Yes.
And then paying the cost to be the boss later. James?
This is a great timing on this question, because my friend Steve, who is relatively new to, evidence-based training, has discovered pre-workout.
Oh no.
Yes, and it's not going so well. So
oh no.
yeah, what I like to remind people is like pre-workout is essentially like meth, right? And like a little bit of meth can help you do your homework and clean the house, but a lot you could have a great time, but a lot of bit of meth and you end up in jail, right? So we want to avoid jail. So when you take pre-workout or just stimulants in general, as Mike already explained very well, it's really just kind of covering up the fatigue that you already have, and it might allow you to kind of push through some boundaries that you would otherwise not be able to. The problem is that you generally will pay the price later, and some people tolerate this better than others. So what's really funny with my friend Steve is he did the classic, like, took 2 scoops against my recommendation. I said, don't take the 2 scoops. And he had a great workout, and then a severe crash and burn and GI distress, and the whole, anybody who's taken enough pre-workout knows exactly what I'm talking about. So some people kind of tolerate that better than others. So if you are someone who is really prone to like a caffeine crash or a stimulant crash, you have to kind of taper how much pre-workout you're using. So you might find that like you might lean a little bit more heavily on pre-workout on a cut phase where you're really just not feeling very energetic and you have to kind of really grind through some of those workouts. But like on a mass phase or a maintenance phase, you might actually just dial it down or maybe not use those at all. Maybe switch to something just like coffee or maybe some tea, something along those lines. But yeah, everybody's a little bit different in how well they can clear out how much caffeine is in their system, how well they tolerate the after effects. Some people will get like the massive sleep pressure as the ADP starts building up like in their brain. And so afterwards they'll feel like that enormous like smash, crash, I'm ready to die feeling. So everybody's a little bit different. You kind of have to know your limits on that. And the same kind of goes with the fasted cardio. I hate using the individual difference kind of easy out. Some people just tolerate it better. Like if you're somebody who can wake up first thing in the morning and bang out cardio and it doesn't really affect you and it fits in your schedule well, that's great. Other people, trying to do the fasted cardio makes them feel like total shit. So it's kind of, it's not necessarily a right or wrong thing. And Henrik, you already kind of alluded to, like if you're doing the same amount of work, right, the amount of fatigue you get from the exercise is basically the same under all conditions. It's more in how you tolerate those conditions in which you're doing that exercise. So if you're somebody who needs that to have some food in your stomach before you exercise so you don't feel like ass the rest of the day, that's fine. If you can wake up first thing in the morning, hit your cardio right away, and it doesn't affect you at all, that's fine too. And you can just roll with it. So I hate using the individual difference kind of easy out, just like we use with the SFR very often, but it is true in both of these scenarios. So just kind of play with the idea, play around with these things and see what works for you.
Next up, the anabolic Italian. Amazing name. Hey, I'm fucking growing here. Whoa.
Do you think Tony Soprano was very anabolic?
Oh, for fat. Yes. Adipocyte anabolism is a thing. It's easy to do. All your genetics are really aligned for it. So it's no training guides incoming. All right. He says, hey, docs, is there a minimum testosterone level for males specifically that is needed for muscle growth? I know the amount of free testosterone dictates how much. That's not entirely the case, but I'll let some other experts take that one on. But is it possible to build muscle even if the test levels are way below the normal range? Given all the training and nutrition variables are equated, good hypertrophic stimulus and caloric surplus with sufficient protein and sleep. Yeah. So it's actually, it's something, it looks like, I would say like a hyperbolic curve. Okay, so there's this exponential region first, and then it flattens out into more of a straight line that keeps going up. Eventually, the straight line gets asymptotic. What do I mean by that? So if we talk it in nanograms per deciliter, I hope I got that unit right. Somewhere between like 200 and 700 is where most adult males who are healthy fall, and that's of testosterone. in the bloodstream. And, can you build muscle at 150 nanograms per deciliter? Yeah, you can. Not as much as you would build at 200 plus. And the difference, did you figure out the
I did.
display thing? Okay, super. The difference in muscle growth in the short term between someone who has, let's say, 200 nanograms per deciliter versus someone who has 700, and these research studies have been done pretty well. In the short term, the difference is very small. In the long term, the difference can be very meaningful. But, so there's not a huge difference within that range, and that would kind of be one of these little lines right here. But below 200, especially below 150, especially below 100, there's a pretty steep drop off all the way to zero testosterone, in which muscle growth is still very possible. Females have approximately zero testosterone. In many cases, they can still build a lot of muscle, but it is going to be much harder. So it's less of a, is there a minimum value, and more of a, where is the borderline? I'm saying right around 200 nanograms per deciliter. If you're below that, I would get some medical intervention to see if anything can be done about raising it, and or if you're really having trouble growing muscle. And at low testosterone values like that, you should have a concomitancy of symptoms, not just muscle growth problems. So look, I have a muscle growth problem. I can't get to 260 at 10% body fat. It's bullshit, right? I don't have low testosterone. So you have to have some other stuff going on. Do you feel unenergized? Is there some mild depression? Is there sexual dysfunction? A good doctor will take care of all those things for you and be like, yeah, it looks like you might actually be hypogonadal. They take your test sample is 180 nanograms per deciliter. Like, yeah, it's below the normative cutoff. Let's put you on TRT, and then everything hypothetically gets better. Of course, at 700, 800, 900, 1,000, 5,000, 10,000, it keeps going up in a straightish sloping down line. So that, of course, muscle growth is way easier if you have 2,000 nanograms per deciliter or 5,000 like many steroid users do. And of course, that's better. But it's even not correct to say that, below 5,000, anywhere below 1,000, there's no muscle growth. Bullshit. Almost all the natties are below 1,000. They grow tons of muscle. It's just when you get into that 200 and less range that little bloop of the going down close to much less muscle growth goes. And it also depends on your age, and the biggest variable here, guys, actually is your training age. Like if you are, 35 years old, you've been crushing it ever since you were 15, and you have normal testosterone values, you may be done growing the preponderance of your muscles, even though your test is normal. And for you to grow more muscle, you may need double or triple or quadruple the test you'd have to take exogenously. Now, on the other hand, if you have very low test levels, 100 nanograms per deciliter as a male, and you're a beginner, and generally your genetics are pretty good for sensitivity to testosterone, myostatin modulation, all of a sudden you could be growing heaps of muscle for years with low testosterone. And then if you get TRT and it bumps to 200 or 300, oh my God, you're fucking Superman. So it's one of these things where anabolic Italian, I'm trying to answer your question in such a way that will be most helpful for you and other viewers, which is to say, I'm trying to answer it in a way that is like, okay, what is the recourse of choices you have after I blab to you and you intellectualize? Are you going to the doctor to get tests? Are you using steroids? Like, what's going on here? Like, that's the thing is like, there's and I'll say this is very politely, it's all in due fun. There's a natty obsession with test levels. Like, motherfucker, are you so obsessed about test levels? Don't be natty anymore. Just inject the shit. You'll get to pick your own test level. It's like a fucking, like a wheel of fortune. You just say whatever you want. So, anything above 200 nanograms per deciliter, roughly, and that number can be debated. And it's, by the way, in Europe, you have a different notation system altogether. Anything above what's considered sort of minimum reference male range is great, and anything above that is better, and anything below that can lead to some troubles in the kind of muscle growth you're going to be getting. James, does that make sense? That last part I said, or the whole what is it? What are we going to do about this kind of problem?
Yeah, so that was kind of my angle on this question was like, is this purely academic or is there something?
Definitely not.
Right. So it's like, okay, so then what are we getting at? And so at that point, granted, Mike is in the know on that stuff more than I am. I would have to look up those numbers. It's just not something floating around in my brain. But what I would say is that this is probably not something you need to concern yourself with unless you have been training for a long time, let's say like 10 years, you've been using advanced training methods, and your gains have substantially slowed down when you otherwise feel like you should be making gains. And then that's one of those times you go see the doctor, or you go to LabCorp and get your testosterone checked, and then you go, oh, maybe I am a little bit below the normal range, or whatever. But what I would say for most people, the limiting factor, especially if you're natty, is not like, am I at this minimal threshold of free testosterone? It's that usually your training methods suck. And I'm not saying that yours do, anabolic Italian, but that's, in my experience, has been the limiting factor for most people, where it's like, well, I can't grow any muscle. Like, well, what's your training program? Like, well, I do 3 sets of 10 on bench, and then I move to triceps, and then I do 3 sets of 10 on delts. It's like, okay, well, you're not really doing a whole lot of training. Have you ever tried training a little bit more? And they're like, what? Train more? What? More than 3 sets? And then that's when Dr. Mike and I go, yeah, more than 3 sets. You can do more than 3 sets. There's nothing magic about that. So that would be my angle, is like, usually it's like you would be training hard for a long time, and then you're not making the progress that you would otherwise expect to be making. Then you would go see your doctor or do some blood work and go from there. But make sure your training's in order first. It's really my point.
And your diet while we're on the subject.
Diet too, yeah.
All right. Dr. McBungle Nuts.
Nice name.
Says, I just finished watching your latest video, 15 rep myorep workout for gigantic delts plus myoreps explained. No longer our latest video, but we've been out for a little while. I've always performed myoreps based off your explanation under the various muscle groups in Hypertrophy Guide Central Hub, which states that for subsequent set, you should only rest in long enough to get between 5 and 10 reps. In this video, you say rest long enough to get between 3 and 5 reps. Why the different recommendations? It is just a variation on the theme. There is no, it's like asking, what's the best way to speak English, with a Scottish accent or with an Alabama accent? Like, it's just it's no big deal. Well, the Scottish is the correct answer.
Neither one people
either preferred.
Understand. If
you want to be understood, that's just American, New York English. Perhaps one is preferable over the other depending on circumstance. Definitely. Sometimes your muscles, like, you would have to spend 30 seconds resting in order to get another set of 5 to 10. You don't even feel the sequestered burn anymore. Sometimes sets of 2 to 3 is what gets it done. Sometimes sets of 2 to 3 in a certain exercise just feel like strength training, and you're not even sequestering a burn with sets of 2 to 3. So it's really what we want with myoreps is this. You get a fucking gnarly pump and burn, and when the burn just barely goes away, you fucking torch it again. When the burn goes away takes 30 seconds, you rest 30 seconds. If when the burn goes away takes 3 seconds, you rest 3. If getting the burn to torch up again takes 5 to 10 reps, you take 5 to 10. If getting the burn to torch up again takes 2 to 3 reps, it's 2 to 3. So that's really kind of what we want to do. Light the fire and then relight. That's really the right answer. Let's see what else he says. Doesn't the 3 to 5 rep target violate the first checkbox in the 4-factor checklist you've talked about, which is 5+ reps? Yes. For conventional sets, that's how rest time is determined. For conventional sets, not for all sets. And in this case, if you do less than 5 reps per myorep mini set, the question that you have to ask is everything else being checked off? Is the muscle the limiting factor? Am I getting nasty tension pump burn? If that's the case, then you're good to go. Could you rest longer? Yeah, only if it made those things better. And if it didn't, then you could rest longer and do sets of only 5 and above. And he says, for example, in your video titled When Should You Use Intensity Techniques, you talk about how nailing that checklist is a requirement for using intensity techniques. And you even specifically say around the 3.5 minute mark that every single myorep set after the first set of, let's say, 10 to 20 has to be above 5 reps. If you stop dropping in your sets below 5 reps, they're not adequately hypertrophic. I would appreciate you clearing this up for me. I really appreciate these Q&As and the amazing info this channel provides. Keep up the good work. Thanks. So basically, essentially all of the advice we give on the channel is anything we say, almost anything, is normally distributed about the thing that we say, and there's always exceptions that are incrementally less common. So there are myorep sets you can do in which every drop set is 8 or 10 reps, which is way more than the 5-ish. And there are some cases which you do 2 or 3 reps, and it's totally fine. The real thing we want to go back is down to the principles. Is the muscle being sufficiently taxed in a stimulatory way? And is it coming at the expense of a high degree of fatigue? And is there an, in the moment, in the situation, obviously better way to do things? If you're checking the stimulus box, you're not checking a big one, the fatigue box, and there's not a clearly better way to do this, and you've tried a few other ways, you're like, nah, resting long enough for delts to do another 5 reps isn't as good as just hitting another 2 or 3, and then resting almost no time and hitting singles just doesn't do anything. If sets of 2 or 3 really do seem to torch me the most, giving me the best stimulus, the least fatigue, then it seems to be the correct answer. Now, generally speaking, above 5 reps is a good cutoff. But James and I could have said above 4 reps, and it would have been almost true almost all the time. So these are just general ideas. And what we don't want people to do is say, well, it's got to be above 2 reps. Now, if it's above 2 reps of all the myorep sets you could do in the universe, there's going to be a lot of sets of 2 and 3, which just don't really do much of a thing. So 5 is the general rule, but almost every rule we ever have has a normally distributed boundary layer about it, which you can violate the rule and still actually get the best possible thing that you can, like in that situation. I'm going to make a stupid analogy just because James is here and I haven't seen him in a while and I want to get jokes. Like generally speaking, if you want to jack off, like it's good to have some tissues and some lube in a comfortable place almost all the time. But, I'm saying when James and I fly and we still get in that airplane bathroom and do what God says needs to be done, and without all the accoutrement of, all the fancy shit, and motherfuckers knocking on the door like, are you dead in there? I'm like, I'm trying. Sometimes shit just got to get done. And adjustment to the situation means that usually don't violate the principles by a huge margin. But if you have to edge them a little bit, edging, it's another porn thing. If you have to edge a little bit to one side or the other to make it work in the moment, then it's good to go. Good question.
I actually can't stand in the front cabin lavatories anymore because they changed the layouts now. Like anyone who's above 5 foot, 8 or 9, like
because
just
of you.
stands up straight. So that was really good explanation. So also just keep in mind, Dr. McBunglenuts, you might actually have some variation in which rep ranges kind of hit the sweet spot for you, even within yourself in different muscle groups. So you might find that like doing sets of like 3 for your biceps just feels like a humongous waste of time where you're just like heave-hoing this huge weight up. Whereas something like for hamstring curls or something like that, you might end up feeling a little bit better because they're more fast twitch, something along those lines. So even within yourself, different muscle groups may respond better to different rep ranges or kind of rest to rep protocols that you're using for myo-rep training.
Let me jump on that real quick, James, because you bring up an excellent point. So a lot of times what we're doing with reps is we have a more objective, standardized way to measure how much time the muscle is producing tension. It's really illustrative here because in the delt workout, we were doing super ROM laterals. Super ROM laterals, each rep takes maybe double the time, maybe triple.
They're awful. They're awful.
Of like something like a leg extension, in which you're just like, meh, meh, meh. Each rep just doesn't take that long. Or like even a bent row. A bent row just kind of like, and you're done. So if we're talking about, we were doing sets of 2 to 3 reps there, then it's totally fine because that's actually the equivalent of like damn near a set of 8 in leg extensions if we're counting reps. But the time produced generating tension, 3 reps of full ROM laterals or super ROM laterals, gee whiz, that's a long time using your delts, and it will lead to that metabolite generation that we're looking for with myoreps. Whereas if you did 3 reps of leg extension, you could just be like, I don't know, something happened, I guess, but I don't feel anything yet.
Yeah. So don't kind of what Mike was already saying about the normalized distribution. Like none of this you need, even with the volume landmarks, everything else, right? There's always kind of a spectrum of whenever we make recommendations, you have to kind of play with it and make it your own. If you just say like Dr. Mike said 5 reps and you just go by that, you'll probably be like 70% of the way there, but you're probably missing out on your own individual variability, right? Across your, just yourself, who is different from Dr. Mike or different from me, and all the different muscles within your body, which may respond better or worse in different circumstances. So always make it your own.
Yeah. Like a lot of that, it goes to even more basic recommendations. If people say, sets of 3 to 6 are the strength range, and someone always raised their hand and said, okay, so if I do sets of 7 and sets of 2, I won't get stronger. And I said, of course you fucking get stronger. And for some people, sets of 2 and 7 work even better than sets of 3 to 6. But if we say, 2 to 7, we're just going to be encountering more error because there's less people under that curve. Or if we say 1 to 30 gets you stronger, any reps between 1 and 30, anything beyond 10, it's just not going to get you that much stronger. A lot of people are going to be upset. Even though I'm sure there's 1 in a million people who physically gets a bigger 1RM training for sets of 11 reps than for sets of 2. That person's out there for sure. And they say, well, when I trained with sets of 11, I got stronger. What do you say to me? And it's like, well, there's this thing called normal distribution. You're right over here, which is totally cool, but we still have to give the average based on the recommended center of the curve.
If I can just belabor this a little bit longer, I think that's kind of I think that's kind of the benefit and curse of hypertrophy training compared to like strength training or sport training, in that there is kind of a little bit more subjectivity in some of this stuff where you kind of have to just get a feel for what you're doing. You got to get a feel for SFR. You have to know when your muscle is ready to recover. Whereas in kind of traditional sports training, or we'll just say strength and power kind of training, it's more linear in the fact that, like, if you're not increasing the weight or the explosivity of the movement, like, you're generally not making progress. And in that regard, like, you can program these things a little bit more rigidly, where it's like, okay, I need to actually like add weight on the bar, or I need to do X, Y, or Z. Whereas in hypertrophy training, you're way more flexible in terms of like the intensities, the volumes, the frequencies, the exercises. You have this huge kind of Bob Ross style canvas where you get to kind of do a lot of stuff, but you have to get a feel for all of these things and figure out what you need as an individual. Whereas like, I can take a group of rugby players and we can all like kumbaya and talk about how individualistic we are, but if they're not getting stronger and more explosive, they're not getting better at rugby per se. You know, so there's kind of a commonality. They tend to funnel in very specific areas. Whereas in hypertrophy training, you have to, like, if you're looking at myoreps, like Dr. McBunglenuts, like, you can take this idea of myoreps, and then you have this like kind of broad application that you have to kind of just play around with and get a feel for. So I think that's kind of the cool part and the hard part. Whereas in traditional training, it's more kind of regimented and rigid, and there's clearer delineations for whatever outcomes you want. Where in hypertrophy training, you have a lot of variability that you can use. You don't have to use certain exercises. You don't have to train at certain intensities, but you have to kind of figure it out for yourself.
Up next, Fake Natty.
Fake Natty. I love that name.
All right. Fake Natty asks, is there a way to emphasize a lower part of the lats and back training? Row science tells us that rowing towards the hip/lower abdomen region hits the low lats as opposed to towards the sternum area. Is there any merit to it? Obviously, changing insertions is impossible without surgical intervention. So without proper genetics, we can forget about cobra lats like Lee Haney or Kai Green. But can they be improved outside of general lats hypertrophy, this lagging area? The answer is probably. Different regions of especially large muscles grow differently depending on the angles of pull. So a lot of this can be, generally like, the more vertical you are, the more you pull to your hips, probably engages your lower lats more versus being lean back more, pulling more to your chest will engage the upper and upper and upper lats until it engages the rhomboids and teres major entirely and very little lats. And then your traps when you're rowing like this. So generally it's like an angles thing. It's like point the angle of the bar to wherever you want the growth to occur. But you can double down on confirming that by thinking of two things. One, are my lower lats feeling tired? Are my lower lats getting sore after training? And are my lower lats getting a pump? Because you can tell if your lower lats are getting a pump versus your outer lats and upper lats. That being said, if you can't, and you say, well, I don't know what part is it, shut the fuck up and just get your back bigger, motherfucker. Because if you're like, I want lower lats, but you can't even tell where in your back you're getting a pump, the fuck up out of here. Come back with a back, and then we'll talk about prioritizing it, James.
Yes, 100%. And just keep in mind too, like, there are just anthropometrical differences. Like, some people, you're just not going to see that lower lat area flare out, and you're primarily going to be seeing that like kind of outer, that big like up in the armpits area. And that's just all you got. That's just what you're born with, right? And there's not much you can do. So I think kind of the strategy here, you don't do the pumping iron Arnold approach where he's like, yes, I'm a sculptor. I can train here. I can train here. I can do this. It's like, what he said is right, where it's like, get that area just as generally as large as you can through sound training practices, like using good SFR movements for your lats. And then kind of once you've hit the intermediate, what we'll call late intermediate stage, and maybe you've stepped on stage a couple times, or maybe it's just personal preference, whatever, but you can clearly see like this is a lagging area, and either it's losing you competitions or it's just not aesthetically pleasing to you and you want to change it. Then you can start playing around with movements that really, really start targeting regionally specific areas within a muscle group. But until you get to that point, and we're talking like training for 10 years or more at this point and getting as big as you can with what you got, I just don't think it's a good use of your time. Whereas like training for big lats will make that whole region generally larger, even if it's not specifically hitting the most specific part of the lats that you're trying to hit. The whole thing's going to get bigger, and you can just go from there. So I would say focus on getting big lats. If you're 10 years in and you're still lagging in some areas, then you can play around with these kind of more specialized movements. But for kind of the beginner to intermediate, it's a huge waste of your time.
James, type in Johan, Johan. into the search bar. There he is.
Jalkanen?
Johan Jalkanen. Yeah, so for your very European names in Europe, everything is better. Actually, my wife is in Europe right now. She's in the Netherlands, the Kingdom of the Netherlands.
Oh, that's right. I forgot.
And yeah, she's hanging out with like Ferry Corsten and all the DJs. Just kidding. She's actually a team doctor for Team USA figure skating. You know what I'm saying? A fucking husband tries to earn some cred, become a top leader in their industry, and then this motherfucking bitch has to come through and try to take my swag from me. Oh, you work for Team USA, huh? Well, you know what? Whatever my wife's name is, I'm still here and I still have self-esteem. You can't put me down with your accomplishments. I'm a man.
At least get the man a kit bag. Get him a USA figure skating like kit, like some shoes,
some
a t-shirt, a jacket, some skates. Yeah.
Forget bodybuilding. I'm transferring to skating. All right. There's a lot to say about that.
Yes.
But we won't say it. We will answer Johan's question instead. He asks, I have heard that if you lose your muscle gains, you tend to rebuild them back 3 times faster compared to building new muscle. Does this principle also concern strength gains? Cheers. So the 3 times, it really just so situationally dependent that averages and undergraduates have to be used, and then they're all bullshit anyway. We can just be confident in saying that muscle rebuilding is much faster than the original building, at least twice as fast, and in many cases, way faster still, depending on the circumstances. Does this apply to strength gains? Two answers. 1, yes, and 2, even more quickly, because muscle, you have to physically regain the tissue. Strength is a lot about neural rewiring, and your brain knows the shit. It's like if you used to speak pretty decent Spanish in high school and you go to a resort for a week in Mexico or like some shit in South America, after a week, you're saying shit you thought you forgot. It only took 1 week to get you as good at Spanish speaking as you ever were. That's very similar for strength. You know, if you haven't deadlifted in years, but you used to deadlift 4 years, 3 sessions later, you're going to be setting in like, oh, fuck, I know how to fucking deadlift again. And your shit's going to go 225, 275, 315. You'll be back to repping 365 in 3 weeks, whereas your best ever may be 405 for 5. And you're like, what the fuck? I'm 40 pounds away. And it just took 3 weeks. Well, yeah, especially if you have the muscle, but that neural architecture rewires ultra, ultra fast. James, anything on that?
Yeah, it's actually super cool. So I've done some research on this for my side project. And what's really interesting is like, so with the strength, particularly the strength, or we'll just kind of say like the motor skill portion, there's a lot of different things at play here. One of which is just like learning certain things at critical time periods in your life. So you can teach a kid to like snowboard when they're 6, and then they're can snowboard forever. They can not snowboard for 10 years, and then they can just get back on and keep snowboarding. Same thing, like the classic example is like riding a bike. Like most people who rode bikes when they were kids, as adults, even 20 years later, after not having ride the bike, can probably get on and pedal around a little bit. Maybe not the best, but they can still do it. The same thing applies to motor skills more broadly. And what's really neat is that once you've kind of, especially like if you're looking at some new skill that you're trying to work on, like whether it's throwing a ball or strength related thing like a low bar squat or a bench press, once that movement has ingrained into what we would call like actual motor learning, so it's gone beyond kind of the what I like to call like the RAM phase and moved into the ROM phase of your brain, where it really it doesn't actually have to go up to your higher brain centers to execute as much anymore. It actually starts to become more automatic. Those things almost never go away, which is pretty cool. The problem is it takes a long time for them to get there, but it's one of those things like once it gets there, it's largely locked in long term. So that being said, if you stop training bench press for years on end, you can probably jump back into benching with reasonably good technique immediately, and the amount of weight that you will be able to increase week to week will be almost astonishing, because all that stuff is just locked in there, which is pretty cool. So yeah, the strength and the motor skill component comes back even faster than the muscle. Pretty neat stuff.
Yeah, very cool. It comes back quick. All right, next up is Jon, John Elgard, with 3 A's or 10 A's in the middle. Jon space, and you should see it.
Fitness with John. There he is.
There he is. Hi, docs. Recently been going through your books, Shot, Spit, and RP Diet 2.0. I'm sure
I was like, wait a minute. The scientific principles of hypertrophy training. How much should I train? Okay, here we go.
Yeah. And
We just call them in-house in RP. We're just like hypertrophy book, volume book.
Yeah. Training book. Anytime I read Reddit, which is luckily rarely, I think the way to get into Reddit is to like abbreviate everything, because there's abbreviations for everything, because a lot of these guys spend so much time online, they don't have time for the shit. But I feel like demonstrating higher value on Reddit is just about as how many fucking abbreviations can you use and pretend to understand. And they're like, wow, this guy really knows this stuff. TLDR.
No one can beat the military in the use of acronyms. So,
oh yeah, sure. Let's see. Multiple times he's read these books, which has completely revolutionized everything regarding my hypertrophy training. That's awesome. Thanks for making amazing content. My question is, how the hell does anyone go about implementing everything the books advocate? It seems that there are things to prioritize.
You go train.
How did you revolutionize your training? Right. How did you revolutionize your training? I'm just kidding. It seems there are things to prioritize over others, and that keeping it ongoing process might be a way to go. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Though implementing and putting everything together takes dedication, studying, and continuous work. How would you go about it, and how does one put it all together most efficiently? So it's actually a very easy answer. Anytime you take anything, any kind of body of knowledge, let's say you decide to start learning economics and you want to reason more accurately about economic things. And okay, so you do. You read an economics book. I mean, there's so much information in one of those books. Which information do you apply? Well, you try as you read the book, and a lot of times it's spelled out for you, as it is in all of our books, what the really core, most important principles are. And then you pick maybe the most important of the most important. Let's say there were 6 ultra important principles. Just take 3: specificity, overload, fatigue management. Write down, if you end up writing shit down, 2 things you should be keeping an eye on for each principle. That's 6 total things to keep an eye on your program. Like overload, increase weights week to week. Make sure I'm going close to fail. That's it. There's 2 things. And just do them until the shit is obvious. And then you feel like you're not really training in an intellectual, enlightened way, because you're like, duh, all this stuff makes sense. You reread the book, and then you pick out a few more peripheral things, not central core principles, start threading them in, and then until they get to be like pretty much reflexive. And then if you want to get even more detailed, reread the book again, or some principles you're like, ooh, this is too complex, but I'm going to write it down now. I'm going to hit it later. Start threading in more of the complexities later on. That's how I would do it. James, is there another way to learn? I'm just not familiar with that.
Yeah, no, I mean, we're going to say the same thing essentially here. And essentially, my answer is kind of periodizing all the little components that you want to work on until you're getting to the behavior changes that you want. So one of the things that we like to hammer home with our athletes is that you cannot train to be good at everything all the time. It's just impossible. It's a poor use of your resources because you just end up getting better at nothing. So like Mike said, sometimes it's good just to focus on a couple things. Like certainly, John, like you probably have a pretty good grasp on something. Like you probably are going to the gym regularly. You probably have a pretty good idea of how to like train your chest or your legs or this and that. So take what you know and then start modifying a couple things at a time and just see where it takes you. Like you don't have to get too crazy with things like myo-reps and intensification techniques and changing RIRs and stuff. Like a simple thing is like, okay, what's your normal routine look like? Can you modulate something like volume, right? That's the easy one that we talk about all the time. Like, why don't you try to find your MRV for 2 muscle groups? Like that's something that's like a pretty basic thing to do. And it fits into kind of your knowledge, your current knowledge and ability zone. So if you try and take on everything all at once, you're going to exceed your knowledge ability zones in some things and be within it in others. So what I would say is periodize it in such a way that you can just kind of tackle a couple things at a time, get a really good grasp of how modulating those things works. And then once you got that down or you feel really comfortable with it, then you move on to a couple new ones, right? So you can literally like train at RIR 2 for entire mesocycles. You don't even have to worry about it while you're messing around with volume because you're trying to figure out one variable at a time. That's okay. Is it ideal? No, but it's an easier way than trying to say like, okay, well, this week I have to use this exercise and I'm trying to figure out SFR, but my SFR is different at different RIRs and different rep ranges. And I don't know how many sets I'm supposed to do or how many sets I'm supposed to get to. It's too much, too confusing. Pick one or 2 things and modulate them, see where they go, and then move on once you got a good grasp on them, which is essentially what Mike said too.
James, very well put. Very, very well put. Next up, we have to scroll nowhere because it's next one down. Trifroz.
That's the new Frozen movie.
Yes. Oh, it would be Frozen 3. I've seen the first. You and I both painfully watched the first 2 Frozen movies several times.
Yes.
We have one of our best friends has a 3-year-old daughter, and She watches Frozen iteratively.
Constantly. And we had to watch it in Spanish too. That was interesting.
Oh, fuck, dude. Oh, Jesus Christ. And then like the Frozen soundtrack is on all the time.
Mm-hmm.
She pretends.
I didn't
with
like
her
the
mom
second
about
one.
who's. I loved the second one. I liked
you?
it more than the first. The second one is like, dude, you just got to be. You're the fucking key to the whole universe, man. You're the shit. You got all the power. Do you feel me?
I guess
That's what I got out of it. I was on a lot of edibles when I saw it. I'm like just sitting there like, word up, whatever she says. Greetings from Finland, dear doctors. Do you think it might be possible that the only way to truly reach your maximum muscular potential, at least as a natty lifter, is to slowly blow it up to obesity and then cut back down to healthy ranges? I'm talking about something like 265 at 5'10 and then cutting back to 220. I know at least Mike did something similar to this in his natty days. I'm asking because the only time I considerably improved my weight to waist ratio, maybe shoulder waist ratio, was after I went up to about 25% body fat and then back down to a healthy range. Again, despite already having had several years of training behind me at the time, training with very similar protocols. I mean, I don't think that's the case. It may be the case. I wouldn't guess that first. I think what gaining a lot of weight does is it drives hypertrophy directly through the nutrient pathways. You can accomplish something pretty much similar by having mini drives and mini cuts and mini drives and mini cuts, and you don't have to get gigantic. But the amount of hypertrophic drive you can get out of 50 pounds of weight increase is maybe the same amount that you could have gotten out of 30 pounds of weight increase, never getting fat, but it would have taken you 3 fucking years, and you could do that same in 1 year. Do you pay the price health-wise? Yes. Skin fold, or you have loose skin all the time and water bloating problems. Yeah, terrible. I wouldn't do it.
And like the suffering it takes to gain that much weight.
Everything about it was awful. I just wouldn't fucking do it. I've done it before. It's terrible. It was one of the worst decisions I ever made in my life. I don't think it makes you more muscular than anything ever. I think you can get just as muscular if you're staying reasonably lean. It's just going to take longer time to do the reasonably lean. So I think what you saw was like an instant cash checkout, Jesus Christ, cash checkout thing where it was like, oh, now this is great. Where, you would have accumulated the same muscle over time. It would have just taken longer. It's kind of like a shitty analogy. It's kind of like you get $1 million now, but you pay 40% tax on it. So you get 600,000. You're like, oh my God, look, 600,000 versus you make $70,000 a year with zero tax for 10 years. You make 700,000, but it takes fucking 10 years. And you're kind of like, God damn it. Like I never have this amount of money in front of me. So.
Yeah, and this is a confounding factor for a lot of people. I would imagine Trifro is probably a similar situation for you. When people actually start trying to mass for the first couple times, not just like, oh, I go to the gym and I lift, where they're like, okay, I want to actually get big, and they start thinking about nutrition. They end up getting a lot of those kind of beginner gains because they're doing harder training and they're actually thinking about like calories and protein for the first times. So as Mike said, they get that immediate like whammo gratification. But a lot of that is just kind of beginner gains, unfortunately. And so then they kind of get locked into this mindset of like, well, my gains just don't come very fast anymore. I feel like the only time I make gains is when I'm really eating a lot. Well, it's like, well, you got all those gains because you were effectively a beginner on the diet side of things, right? You were just eating a lot more calories and protein than you had before. So you're reaping those. So that can be a confounding factor. What I would say, Trifros, so Mike already nailed it. Like you definitely don't have to eat to obesity. This has been demonstrated very well that there is some threshold at which increases in calories do not potentiate further gains in muscle mass and daily calories. So that's definitely a thing where you can't just like indefinitely eat and expect to gain more muscle. At some point, there's a major trade-off in the amount of body fat that you're accumulating. If you are gaining weight, here's kind of the Dr. James skeptical people's eyebrow. If you are gaining weight and you are not making muscular gains, the problem is not the nutrition side of things. The problem is probably the training side of things. So at that point, I would go back and reevaluate your training program. You might be underdoing it in terms of volume, which for hypertrophy training, I think is the case more often than not. So keep that in mind, because I think like if you are gaining weight at a reasonable rate, but you don't think that weight is translating into muscle mass gained, or at least not as much as you think that you should be doing, the problem is less likely that you're not eating enough, and the problem is more likely that your training program is maybe not as good as it could be. And I know that's a tough pill to swallow, but trust me, I've been there. I've coached many people who have been in that same situation, and that tends to be the common denominator. So just keep that in the back of your mind, and also keep in the back of your mind the first time you did it, And if you gained a whole bunch of weight, probably was like a factor of like noob games, which is fine. Good timing. Dr. Mike is back.
Oh, sorry about that.
Oh, you're good.
My computer started to die a lot sooner than I thought it would.
I'm just admiring. This looks like Martins Litzis here. Looking at his fucking arms. Jesus Christ.
Is that his arms really don't look like that? What the fuck is that?
I don't know. That's what I was just thinking. Like, are his arms really that big? I don't remember them being that big.
Nah.
You think that's
hard?
All right.
All right. Next up, Matthew Denton.
God damn it! I gotta search. Matthew. There he is.
All right. Matthew Denton asks, "Hey, Dr. Mike, from the pictures I've seen on Instagram, you have a pretty good stomach vacuum. Do y'all have any tips or tricks regarding how to go about perfecting someone's stomach vacuum, and perhaps some commentary on where training the vacuum would fit into one's training plan? No clue. I practice posing a few times a week in my off season. I practice posing either every other day or every day as I lead up to contest. When I practice posing, I practice the vacuum. When I have plenty of body fat, I can't do a vacuum at all. When I get leaner, the vacuum magically appears. So getting lean is the really way to practice it. And also just practice it in the context of posing. And the best way to practice it is to try to hold the vacuum for as long as you can with every pose. It's tough, but you get better and better at it. I have no special insights, tips, or tricks. And a lot of times, whether or not you can hit a vacuum is, I think, pretty genetic. Some people just can't fucking do it. And it just doesn't even occur to them. Or they do it, it looks kind of not so great. Some people can hit a vacuum like normally, even the day of the show. If I relax my stomach, I have a big gut. I just have a big fucking gut. But I can also pull a nasty vacuum. Like, it makes no fucking sense. So sometimes people who have really slim waists can't pull a vacuum. Some people with guts can pull a vacuum. It runs the whole gamut, I think.
I have no tips whatsoever on how to do the vacuum. No fucking clue here. But what I can say is that I know this is going to sound silly, but it will make sense, hopefully, to some of you guys. With bodybuilding specifically, if you're trying to compete in bodybuilding, right, the fitness component is obvious. It's getting your muscles as big and as lean as possible. Bodybuilding also has a skills and tactics component, which I know sounds ridiculous at face value, but bear with me. Your skills are your ability to execute your poses in the most pleasing or aesthetic way based on your own shapes and symmetries and anthropometry. Then the tactics component is your ability to effectively put that into good posing routines and possibly compete against other people, like in a pose down. So the way that you would approach this is the way that you would approach skills and tactics in any other sport, right? You would allocate a specific number of like time or repetitions to actually practicing the skills at certain points throughout your competition cycle. So the question of like, how do you train stomach vacuum? It's the same way you train passing a rugby ball. It's just a different context. You allocate time to doing it. You allocate like milestones and criteria for success in the training, and you modulate your intensities and volumes just like you would with anything else. I know that sounds silly because it's just posing, but all of those things fit into your training plan if you are a serious bodybuilder. It doesn't mean that you're necessarily training the vacuum all the time throughout the year. Like Mike said, he might only practice a little bit more when he's actually in his competition cycle. But if you're somebody who's trying to improve on your skills in bodybuilding, which is your posing routines, whether they're the actual routines or the actual individual components themselves, there's no way around it. You got to practice it. And the practice that you do is the same that you would do for any other sports skills or tactics.
There's actually a sport at the end. David Parker is our last contestant for today, James.
David Parker. Not to be confused with Peter Parker.
Oh yeah, Jared said the last Spider-Man was like the greatest movie he's ever seen. Or something.
Oh, I haven't seen the most recent one. No Way Home or Far From Home or something like that.
All right.
I don't remember what it was.
On the question, David Parker says, "Hi docs, would love to hear your thoughts on the 3/7 method. To perform, you load up with 70% of 1RM and do 3 reps. Rest 15 seconds, 4 reps, rest 15 seconds. Continue ascending to 7 reps. This is 1 set."
So like you have like several understimulative mini sets within the big set.
Yeah. There are 2 preliminary studies on this that I found. Cite the ID of the study. The 3/7 method has gained popularity with Jackson P.S. being a notable practitioner. Cool. So we can insult Jackson, our friend, by answering this question.
Fuck that guy. Just
first question: have you or would you try it? I haven't tried it. I
like the next line. Looks like a country cousin of myoreps.
Looks like a country cousin of the myorep.
That was good.
I can personally confirm it does deliver a good burn/pump. My second question is how it stacks up against myoreps. Perhaps it would help, or at least make you laugh at me, to use a narrative. Myorep Mike performs 25 reps of bicep curls and does them as 12-5-5-3. His gangsta living cousin 3-7 Stan swaggers over and does 25 reps of bicep curls as 3-4-5-6-7. As he rudely clanks the barbell down into the squat rack and shouts, 3-7 for life, baby.
I like how the story's evolving.
David, you've outdone yourself.
This is great.
Let's assume they both rested about the same amount of time in between each mini set. Are we using the same load? The identical in all relevant ways. Gen X training, myoreps definitely wins on the time efficiency, only 3 rest breaks instead of 4. For perceived effort, Mike and Stan both reported feeling an intense burn during the last 13 reps for Mike and 6/7 for Stan. Would it be wrong to speculate that the total metabolites accumulated are similar for Mike and Stan? Yes, it would be wrong, and I'll get to why. What about the overall fiber recruitment between the two? Would love to hear your clarifying thoughts. So go easy on me. Obviously, whether or not we train with myoreps 3-7 is not make or break, but could be fun, interesting to compare and contrast. Of course, and this is a very good question. It allows us to put the scope on it. So I would say there is one way in which you describe this method to me stands out as not great. If we look at the mini sets in isolation, let's take a look at the myorep set. It's 12-5-5-3. What fraction of those sets got you a very close proximity to failure? All of them. Now, if we look at the 3-7 method, was the set of 3 close to failure? No, there's no way. If you can do 7 sets 45 seconds later, or 7 reps 45 seconds later, or whatever, after a bunch of sets, there's no way 3 was close to failure. 4 was nowhere close to failure. 5 may be pretty close to failure, but with only 15 seconds rest and you're actually allowed to get a 6 reps, then it wasn't that close to failure because you wouldn't be able to do that. How close was 6 to failure? Pretty close, but not so close because with only 15 seconds left, you were able to do 7 reps. Anything in which you can do more reps in a later set means you can, by definition, either rested a long time, which is logically obviated here, and or it is not very close to failure. So I would say that only the 7th mini set, 7 rep mini set, the last one of these is for sure close to failure, maybe the last 2, whereas every single mini set in the myoreps is close to failure. That leads me to believe that myoreps per unit of volume are more stimulative. That's it.
Yeah, so even if you just look at the 70% of 1RM as a starting point, sometimes these numbers escape me, but to me, that's somewhere in the range of like 10 to 15 reps for most people. So, I mean, doing 3 reps, let's just say conservatively, they could do 10. I mean, homie, that's 7 away from failure. That's not even close, right? And it's just not a good starting point. So the question is like, could you have started doing something more intense, either using more weight or being closer to failure? And the answer is almost certainly yes. So this is kind of an instance of like, can you do it? Yes. To me, it just seems like you're loading up a bunch of preemptive kind of junk volume sets that aren't really doing much for you outside of just limiting what you could have done if you would have just started going a little bit harder. Also, even kind of in your description here, where it's like feeling an intense burn during the last 13 reps, 5-3-3 for Mike, 6 and 7 for Stan. I mean, even in that example, it's like, well, the 5-3-3 are 3 effective sets ultimately versus the 6 and 7 effect. Those are 2 effective sets if we're doing myoreps, where if you're not really feeling the burn, then you're not really taking advantage of the intensification technique. So to me, this one seems, kind of like, as you very hilariously described, as the country cousin of myoreps. I would personally not do it this way, just because it seems like it front loads a lot of unnecessary
junk volume.
Junk volume, yeah, it's just junk volume. That's, I guess, I'm trying to dance around the issue, but it's junk volume. Whereas if you just get right into the mix, all of those sets are stimulative.
I got one more critique while we're on the subject. The very specific prescriptive combination of percent 1RM and exact repetitions and exact finishing point leave this probably inappropriate for not most, but many people that don't fall right in the distribution which this is targeting as far as fatigue dynamics. So for example, some people, 70% of their 1RM is, if this happens, is a 5 rep max. Like for these people, they wouldn't be able to do this at all. They would get 3 reps, they would rest 15 seconds, get 1 rep, rest 15 seconds, get 0, and they'd be done. Other people, their 70% 1RM is their 20 rep max, which means this entire protocol would be submaximal for them, and they would finish the last 7th rep, put it down, and be like, am I growing yet? And
woo, oh, that was tough.
Whoa, that was heavy. 140. Got away from me like a big old fish. That's all direct writing quotes, by the way. So, James and I are not fans of like sort of holistically prescriptive programs. Like if someone says do XYZ exactly, our first question is, how does that account for individual differences in autoregulation? The cool thing about myoreps is like, do like 15 to 25 reps in your first set. Hey, sweet. That's a big range. No problem. And then it's like, just do sets with 5 to 10 seconds ish of rest for like 3 to 8 reps per set. Go. I mean, that accommodates almost everyone. And no matter where you start or where you fit in, you'll be able to do what the purpose of myoreps is, which is to reach close to failure multiple times in the same large set. If that's the purpose of this protocol, it does not accomplish that for lots and lots of people.
Which is funny. Just this is like a totally this is just a semantical argument, but like the myoreps is an intensification technique, right? Whereas like this version of it actually like de-emphasizes the intensity of what you're doing, right? So like if you're doing myoreps, the point is to make it harder, more intense than normal training. So if you're not riding like that pain train while you're doing this, the question would then be like, why am I doing this at all? Why don't I just do regular sets at this point instead of like janky myoreps?
Yeah, part of this is a warm-up for sure. Like
I was thinking the same thing. Like, yeah, the first set's like, if you didn't warm up, then yeah, that first set's great.
Sure. That's it. That's all we got for today, folks.
Well, I feel embarrassed with my technical issues today. It actually was just more simple than I realized. So I'm an idiot, but we already knew that. Dr. Mike, any housekeeping stuff?
No housekeeping yet, but fun things are on the horizon. I will say we have released a new product on RP. It is the custom training template program builder. And there's links all over our YouTube. So just go into one of our YouTube videos, and probably one of the top links is going to be that tool. I do have a long video where I describe how the fuck that all worked. And that custom program builder thing is basically you choose all the muscle groups you want in your plan. You choose if you want regular growth or specialization. And then the plan you get in email is exactly all that, but pre-structured and a whole mesocycle auto-regulation built in. You just basically pick all the muscles you want to train, how much you want to train them, and then you get a plan that is basically good for 12 to 18 weeks of hypertrophy training for under $100. Pretty fucking sweet. So if you like all the shit we do, if you like all the shit we say, but when it comes time to execute, you're like, fuck, I had to make my own program. What about RIR? What about soreness? What about pumps? This is all built in, taken care of. You can understand what you're doing and at the same time be deburdened of having to do it yourself. So,
and then side benefit, which might not be like apparent to everyone, if there are certain muscle groups that you just could not give a fuck about, like forearms, calves, traps, you can just not include them and add up more volume on the things that you want to train. I think that's the best part about these new templates. If you just don't want to train calves, you don't have to get the male physique templates and ignore the calf
like,
one.
What do I do for calves? Right.
You literally get to take calves out, and then it's calculated into actually adding more training into the other stuff, which that calf training would have accommodated, would have taken up. So I think that's probably a really cool part. So for those of you who have kind of like a set style that you like to train, like you train most muscle groups, but maybe you don't train posterior delts or traps specifically, and you don't want that in your training program, well, guess what? Now you can pick exactly what you want and reuse it many times over. So pretty cool.
It's easy, motherfucker. Samuel Jackson. Samuel Jackson actually endorsed the product. He loves it.
Can you stop yelling at me, please? No.
I'm not yelling. That's how I talk. Oh, so many great quotes.
Woo. All right, folks, we're going to wrap this one up. It's been a while. It's good to be back. We love your questions. Thanks for hanging out with us, and we will see you next time.